So it's been a while since I actually last did a smartphone review. And I guess one main reason is just that I got tired of reviewing smartphones because a lot of them have very similar features. However, for a whole range of reasons, this particular smartphone that I have in my hand was really that compelling to take a look at. As early as now, at this point in the video, I can tell you that the photography features of this Zenfone 10 just really makes sense and basically brings out the beauty of smartphone photography. Now, I have a long history with ASUS smartphones that dates back in 2017 when I first got the Zenfone 3 Zoom. After that, I had a Zenfone 4, a Zenfone 5, and the most recent one was the Zenfone 8 Flip. And to be honest, one of the things that I love about ASUS Zenphones is the fact that there's always something unique about the smartphone. There's always something unique about the camera features of the smartphone. And so when I saw the Zenfone 10, I was a bit confused as to what was so special about the camera of this. And what I can say is that there is definitely more than meets the eye. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into the tech specs of this phone, but what you need to know is that this has a 5.92-inch diagonal AMOLED screen with full HD resolution and 144 Hz. It weighs just 172 grams, and to be honest, I've gotten tired of really big screens on phones. So the size of this, just in my opinion, is just perfect for my hand. And that's something that really has an implication when it comes to taking photos with your smartphone. However, with that size actually comes a 4,300 milliampere battery, which in my experience has lasted me more than a day. And there was even a time wherein I left this just on standby for multiple days. And if I'm not mistaken, it lasted around 6 days. But that was with me not really touching the phone too much. But with just daily use and social media and of course using the camera, this has lasted me for over 24 hours. The Zenfone 10 also comes in 3 variants depending on memory and storage. There is a version with 8GB RAM and 128GB of storage. There is another one with 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage. And this particular one has 16GB of RAM and 512GB of storage. Now, ASUS sent over the Midnight Black version, but there is also a white, a green one, a red one, and a blue one. And to be honest, all of those colors look really nice. But this one in particular, I like it because it is matte black and it's the kind of phone that you don't want to put in a case. However, in the box, there is a thin case that comes inside the box, but they also sent one that was made specifically for this by the brand Rhino Shield. So that's another cool thing about it. Now, given all that, let's talk about the cameras. This has 2 rear cameras and 1 front-facing camera. The front-facing camera is a 32-megapixel front camera, so if you are the kind of person who likes to take selfies, then that is going to be really nice for you. However, the 2 rear cameras are really what excites me about this one. The secondary camera, it's a 13-megapixel wide-angle camera with an aperture of f2.2. And that's something pretty standard with most multi-camera smartphones that we have in the market. But of course, the star of the rear panel is the 50-megapixel 1/1.56-inch camera with an aperture of f1.9, and it actually has a physical hybrid gimbal. I'm gonna let that sink in for just a bit because it is quite hard to believe that there is actually a gimbal on this thing. But basically what it does is, of course, the camera is also able to adjust physically with the movement of your hand or of the smartphone. And it comes in combination with EIS. So this is basically a combination of electronic image stabilization and optical image stabilization. And that is, of course, handled by the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor that we have in this phone. Now, if you're going to ask me what's so nice about this smartphone, it's basically the synergy of all those specs that I mentioned. It's the processor and the physical features of the camera. The camera itself has many different modes. Of course, we have the standard photo modes, the portrait mode, which basically just simulates bokeh. We have slow motion, we have time lapse, but of course, for me, one of the best things that I like using in smartphones like these are the manual photo and the manual video modes. Now, when it comes to video, this can actually shoot 8K video with 24 frames per second, or it can do 4K at 60, or Full HD at 60. And of course, now that we're talking about video, that is actually where the gimbal will shine. When you're using the Pro Video mode, you basically have a range of options. And when you are recording at Full HD, you have the option of the full range of stabilization options. Now, of course, there is a mode for turning off the stabilization. There is a standard stabilization mode. But when you're at Full HD, you can shoot with adaptive and hyper steady mode. Now, as you can see in the sample footage, I was walking right behind a friend of mine and I was following him with the camera. And you can see in this sample that there is still a bit of shake coming from, of course, the steps that I was taking and, of course, the shake of my hand. And this is basically what we have when we use the adaptive stabilization. Now, in this next clip, you will see the difference when you are using the hyper steady mode. And you can see that there is a bit of crop. And you can see that the movement is much smoother, somehow resembling the use of an actual gimbal. While I was testing this smartphone, I was also testing a new lens for my camera. And I decided to pack light and just bring one camera body. So the B-roll footage that I had for the previous video, which is of course the Sony 16 to 35mm lens review, what you see there is actually just footage from the Zenfone 10 that I used as a secondary camera for that shoot. Now, when it comes to photography, of course, there will be a lot of implications with the sensor size of this camera and the resolution. The main camera is a 50 megapixel 1/1.56 inch sensor, which is a bit bigger than what we're used to have on smartphones. Now, I always say that the biggest limitation of any smartphone will be the inability to zoom, but if you're using a 50 megapixel sensor and you're using a bigger than usual sensor, then you're gonna have a bit more room to crop, just so you have a bit of room to virtually zoom in. In addition to that, there are some AI features on this smartphone that can actually help you maintain or enhance the image quality that you're getting from the smartphone. One thing I really like as a landscape photographer is the AI object sensing, which is basically the camera being able to determine what you're taking a photo of and segmenting the image to different segments. And what it's going to do with that is that it's going to help you balance out the exposure. For example, when you're outdoors and you're taking a picture of a nice view with the sky much brighter, it's going to be able to detect and separate the sky and the ground. And that means that it will be able to adjust the exposure of the sky and of the ground separately so you have a more balanced image. This is basically an AI-powered HDR feature. Now, when it comes to zooming in, it actually also comes with hyper clarity, which is something that I particularly like because it then bypasses the inability to zoom in. Now, when you zoom in or when you crop into the image significantly, the hyper clarity is basically going to oversample the sensor with information. And it's going to give you more pixels to work with and more data to work with so that your zoomed in image will not be of low resolution. This is perfect because, of course, what we have here is basically an ultra-wide angle lens and a wide-angle lens. And we don't have a telephoto camera here, but since it's 50 megapixels and it has that feature, it's going to be able to compensate for that limitation. And what you're going to have is a slightly smaller image, but with more data to work with. Now, perhaps my favorite feature of this smartphone is the light trails mode. Probably because, of course, again, I am a landscape photographer. What it does is it basically uses the capability of the gimbal to hold down an exposure and basically do longer exposures and maintain the perspective while you are just holding it in your hand. And basically what this allows you to do is let you take virtually long exposures by making sure that the shift of your hand is compensated for by the gimbal. Now, it's not actually taking long exposures because, of course, if there's abundant light, then you would get burnt out images. But instead, what it's doing is that it's using the gimbal to hold down the position, and then it's taking multiple images that it will later on automatically stack to create a simulated long exposure effect. Now, as a landscape photographer, this is of course something I enjoy doing with my bigger cameras. But with smartphones, I'd like to go the simpler route and not have to use filters on my smartphone camera. And this is why I particularly like this feature on the Zenfone 10 because it takes away the complexities of the things that you might want to do, but still allow you to achieve that result that you want to do with your smartphone. I think it's basically enabling the user to do all these creative things, all the everyday photography things, but not compromise on letting the user actually achieve the effect that they want to do. And lastly, perhaps the most underrated feature is basically just the image quality. Now, for the past couple of years, I've been testing smartphones that have both RAW and JPEG output. And honestly, I've been just preferring to use JPEG for all of them because I found that the DNG output of most smartphones don't really have that much of a difference. But what I noticed in this one is that there is actually value in using the raw images and editing the raw images because it actually does give you a lot more room and a lot more detail to work with. Overall, I was just really surprised with how much detail this is giving me when it comes to the stills that I've taken. Plus, of course, all the convenience that it has when doing a little more than a snapshot, meaning those simulated long exposures, time-lapse, slow motion, and of course also shooting videos. If you're purely a smartphone photographer, the capabilities of this smartphone will definitely benefit you because basically a lot of the things that you would want to do with your smartphone camera are there because of all the features put together. You can do long exposures, you can do time-lapse, you can do slow motion, you can do video without really having to overcomplicate the shooting process with a smartphone. At the same time, if you're a content creator, as I said, it's something that you can use as a B-roll camera, as a backup camera, or just a camera that you have in your pocket for when you want to shoot additional clips. Now, putting all of that together in a small phone with a good processor and a powerful battery, well, I think there really is more than meets the eye with the Zenfone 10. And there we go. If you have any questions about the ASUS Zenfone 10, specifically the camera and the photography features, then do leave them down below in the comment section. Of course, if you're new to the channel, my name is Nicco Valenzuela. I'm a landscape and architectural photographer, and this channel talks, of course, a lot about photography and tech. And if you're into that, then please do click that notification bell and that subscribe button. In any case, thank you for watching.